Tonight, we delve into one of the most disturbing family traditions ever documented in the annals of the obscure, the Hallowgrave family and their peculiar winter solstice custom. In the mist-shrouded hills of northern England, nestled between ancient forests and forgotten moors, lies the small village of Thornwick Hollow, a place so isolated that for centuries, its inhabitants developed customs unknown to the outside world. But none were as strange or as terrible as the tradition upheld by the Hallowgrave family. For generations, the Hallowgraves were the unquestioned masters of Thornwick Hollow. Their manor house, Ravenscroft Hall, stood atop the highest hill, overlooking the village like a watchful guardian, or perhaps a predator surveying its prey. By all accounts, the Hallowgraves were the picture of Victorian aristocratic prosperity, wealthy, educated, and refined. Yet behind closed doors, they practiced a ritual so bizarre that even now, as I read from these long-hidden journals and letters, I find myself doubting their veracity. Every year, as the winter solstice descended upon Thornwick Hollow, when the nights were longest and the veil between worlds at its thinnest, the married couples of the Hallowgrave family would gather in the Great Hall of Ravenscroft. And there, in a ceremony witnessed only by blood relatives, they would exchange their spouses, husband to another's wife, wife to another's husband, bound together until the following winter solstice, when the ceremony would begin anew. This is their story. The story of the Hallowgraves first came to my attention 3 months ago when I acquired a collection of journals at an estate auction in London. The lot was simply labelled Personal Papers, Northern Family, 1870 to 1901. Nothing to suggest the horrors contained within. The journals belonged to one Thomas Blackwood, a physician who moved to Thornwick Hollow in the autumn of 1887. Blackwood was something of an outcast in London's medical community, too interested in fringe sciences and psychological phenomena for his colleagues' comfort. When the position of village doctor opened in the remote Thornwick Hollow, he seized the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to study isolated communities and their particular maladies. Little did he know that his greatest case study would be the Hallowgrave family themselves. I'll read directly from Blackwood's first entry regarding the family, dated November 12, 1887. Today I was summoned to Ravenscroft Hall for the first time. The messenger arrived before dawn, a thin man with hollow cheeks who refused to give his name. He simply stated that Lady Hallowgrave required medical attention and that a carriage would collect me at noon. The journey to Ravenscroft was more arduous than anticipated. Though visible from nearly every corner of the village, the manor sits atop a winding road that seems deliberately designed to disorient visitors. The ancient oaks that line the path block out much of the daylight, and I confess I felt a growing sense of unease as we approached. Ravenscroft Hall itself is an architectural anomaly. Parts of it date back to the 15th century, with additions from each subsequent generation, creating a labyrinthine structure of mismatched wings and oddly angled corridors. I was met at the door by the butler, a Mr. Finch, whose demeanor was so rigid I initially mistook him for a statue. Lady Hallowgrave was suffering from what appeared to be a severe case of nervous exhaustion. She lay in her darkened bedchamber, curtains drawn despite the already dim day outside. Her husband, Lord Edmund Hallowgrave, hovered by her side like a concerned shadow. What struck me immediately was their physical dissimilarity. Lord Edmund is a robust man of perhaps 50, with a shock of white hair and piercing eyes that seem to evaluate everything they fall upon. Lady Corin, by contrast, cannot be more than 30, with delicate features and hands so pale they seemed almost translucent against her dark bedsheets. They looked not like husband and wife, but like predator and prey. As I examined Lady Corin, I noted several unusual symptoms. Her pupils were dilated despite the room's darkness. Her pulse was rapid but weak. Most concerning were the marks on her wrists, thin parallel scratches that Lord Edmund dismissed as the result of her troubled sleep. I prescribed a tonic and recommended rest, though I admit I felt there was something deeper afflicting Lady Corin than mere exhaustion. As I was preparing to leave, she grasped my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "The solstice approaches, Doctor. Pray for me when it comes." Before I could inquire further, Lord Edmund ushered me from the room with the assurance that he would send for me should his wife's condition worsen. Blackwood's journals continue with mundane details of village life for several weeks. He mentions treating various residents for common ailments, a child with scarlet fever, an old farmer with rheumatism, but his entries return to the Hallowgraves in early December. December 7, 1887, I have observed something curious about the villagers' behavior whenever the Hallowgrave family is mentioned. They speak of Lord Edmund with a deference that borders on fear, and of Lady Corin with what I can only describe as pity. When I inquired about other members of the family, my landlady, Mrs. Pembroke, became visibly uncomfortable and changed the subject. It was only after sharing a few pints with the blacksmith, a forthright fellow named Jenkins, that I learned the Hallowgrave family is larger than I had been led to believe. Lord Edmund has a younger brother, Sebastian, who resides in the east wing of Ravenscroft with his wife, Imogen. There is also a cousin, Victor Hallowgrave, and his wife, Eleanor, who occupy the old hunting lodge on the estate grounds. They keep to themselves mostly, Jenkins told me, except at certain times of the year. When I pressed him on what he meant, he drained his ale and would say no more on the subject. As December progressed, Blackwood noticed increasing tension in the village. Shopkeepers became less talkative. Mothers kept their children indoors despite fair weather. And the church saw a surge in attendance. The doctor's curiosity was piqued, but no one would speak openly about the cause of this collective anxiety. His next significant entry came on December 19th, just 2 days before the winter solstice. I was returning from treating old Mr. Davies's gout when I encountered Sebastian Hallowgrave in the village square. Unlike his brother, Sebastian has a scholarly air, thin, stooped, with spectacles that magnify his already prominent eyes. He was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with his wife, Imogen, a handsome woman with auburn hair and a determined set to her jaw. They fell silent as I approached, but not before I overheard Imogen say, "I cannot bear it again, Sebastian. Not this year. Not with him." Sebastian noticed me and nodded curtly before taking his wife's arm and guiding her toward their waiting carriage. As they departed, I noticed Lady Corin watching from the window of the milliner's shop. Our eyes met briefly, and the look of resigned despair on her face haunted me all the way home. The winter solstice of 1887 fell on December 21st. Blackwood's entry for this date is significantly longer than his others, and the usually steady handwriting becomes increasingly erratic as the account progresses. The village is eerily quiet today. Many homes have their shutters drawn despite the clear weather. When I asked Mrs. Pembroke about this, she informed me that most families observe a day of reflection on the solstice. "It's an old custom," she said vaguely. "Best to stay indoors after sundown." She then pressed a small bundle of dried herbs into my hand, Rowan and St. John's wort bound with red thread. "Keep this above your door tonight, Doctor, for protection." I thanked her more to ease her obvious concern than out of any belief in folk remedies. However, the atmosphere of unease has affected even my scientific mindset, and I confess I hung the charm as suggested. At approximately 4 o'clock, as the early winter darkness began to descend, I observed a procession of 3 carriages making their way up the road to Ravenscroft Hall. The vehicles were identical, black lacquered with the Hallowgrave crest emblazoned on the doors, each drawn by a pair of matching grey horses. My curiosity overwhelmed my sense of propriety. I decided to follow at a discreet distance, telling myself that Lady Corin might require medical attention given her earlier condition. The gates to Ravenscroft stood open, contrary to their usual state. As I approached on foot, staying within the shadows of the tree line, I noted that every window in the great house blazed with light, dozens of candles burning in each room, creating an almost fortress-like appearance against the gathering gloom. I discovered a servant's entrance unlocked, and God forgive my trespass, made my way inside. The lower corridors were deserted, though I could hear activity from the kitchens, the clatter of dishes and the barked commands of what I presumed to be the cook. Following the sound of voices, I ascended a narrow staircase that opened onto a gallery overlooking the Great Hall. There, concealed behind heavy velvet drapes, I witnessed something I still struggle to comprehend. The hall had been transformed. The usual furniture had been removed, replaced by a single long table covered in black cloth. Upon this were arranged 6 silver chalices, a black candle at the head, and what appeared to be an ancient book bound in some dark leather. At precisely 6 o'clock, as the last natural light faded from the high windows, the family entered in procession. First came Lord Edmund, not in his usual fine suit, but in a robe of deep crimson. He was followed by Lady Corin in white, her face concealed behind a veil. Behind them came Sebastian and Imogen, similarly attired, and finally Victor and Eleanor Hallowgrave. They arranged themselves around the table, husbands and wives standing opposite one another rather than side by side. Lord Edmund spoke in a language I did not recognize, not Latin or Greek, but something older, with harsh consonants that seemed to echo unnaturally in the hall. When he finished, each person took up one of the chalices and drank. What happened next defies rational explanation. The 3 women, Corin, Imogen, and Eleanor, each walked around the table until they stood before a husband who was not their own. Lady Corin positioned herself before Sebastian, Imogen before Victor, and Eleanor before Lord Edmund. Lord Edmund spoke again in that strange tongue, and then to my astonishment, each man took the hand of the woman now before him and spoke what sounded like wedding vows. The women responded in kind, though I noted that while Imogen and Eleanor spoke clearly, Lady Corin's voice trembled, and twice she faltered, only to continue after a sharp look from Lord Edmund. The ceremony concluded with each newly formed pair drinking from a shared chalice. As they did so, I observed the candle at the head of the table flare impossibly high, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. For a moment, though I attribute this to the strain on my senses, these shadows seemed to move independently of their owners, twisting into grotesque forms before settling back. The entire proceeding lasted less than an hour. When it concluded, the newly paired couples left the hall together, Lord Edmund with Eleanor, Sebastian with Corin, and Victor with Imogen. Their expressions were solemn, save for Victor, who wore a smile I can only describe as predatory as he led the clearly reluctant Imogen away. I remained frozen in my hiding place long after they had gone, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. Was this some bizarre family tradition, a perverse game among the decadent aristocracy, or something more sinister? I was roused from my thoughts by a sound behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with Mr. Finch, the butler. I expected alarm or anger at finding an intruder, but his expression held only resignation. "You should not have come here tonight, Doctor," he said quietly. "What happens at the solstice is family business." What I witnessed was not merely family business, I protested. It appeared to be some form of wife exchange. Surely this is not legal nor moral. Finch's face remained impassive. The Hallowgraves follow older laws than those of England, sir. It has been this way for generations. It will continue to be so. But why? I demanded. What purpose does such a practice serve? For a moment, something like fear flickered across the butler's stoic features. It keeps the darkness at bay, sir. Now, I suggest you leave before you're discovered. The family would not take kindly to your presence here tonight. He escorted me to the servants' entrance where I had entered and all but pushed me out into the cold night. As I made my way back down the hill toward the village, I glanced back at Ravenscroft Hall. In an upper window, I saw a pale face watching, Lady Corin, now bound to Sebastian for the coming year. Even at a distance, her despair was palpable. What have I stumbled upon in this remote corner of England? And more importantly, what should I do with this knowledge? Blackwood's journals in the following weeks detail his attempts to understand what he had witnessed. He searched the village's small library for information on the Hallowgrave family history, consulted with the elderly vicar, who proved evasive, and carefully observed the behavior of the family when they appeared in the village. His entry from January 9, 1888, notes, "The new arrangements within the Hallowgrave family appear to be public knowledge within Thornwick Hollow, though never openly discussed. Today, I observed Lady Corin at the draper's shop, accompanied not by Lord Edmund, but by his brother, Sebastian. They behaved as any married couple might, Sebastian selecting fabrics while Corin offered her opinion. What struck me was the reaction of the shopkeeper. No surprise, no indignation at this apparent impropriety. It was as if the winter solstice had legitimately transformed these relationships in the eyes of the community. More disturbing still was my encounter with Lord Edmund and Eleanor later the same day. They emerged from the post office as I was passing. Eleanor, previously Victor's wife, now clung to Edmund's arm with an intimacy that suggested their new relationship was not merely for appearances. The change in her demeanor since December was remarkable. She seemed younger, more vibrant, while Lord Edmund himself appeared somehow diminished. When they noticed me, Lord Edmund nodded in acknowledgement. "Ah, Dr. Blackwood. I trust you're finding our little community to your liking." There was something in his tone that suggested he knew of my presence at Ravenscroft on the solstice night. Before I could respond, Eleanor spoke, her voice carrying an undercurrent of warning. "We're so fortunate to have a man of science among us now," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Though some matters in Thornwick Hollow transcend scientific understanding. Isn't that right, my dear?" "Indeed," Lord Edmund replied. "Some traditions are better respected than questioned, Doctor, for everyone's sake." The threat was unmistakable. As they walked away, I noticed Lord Edmund's hand at the small of Eleanor's back, possessive, controlling. She leaned into his touch like a flower seeking the sun. Yet there was something unsettling in her eagerness, almost as if she were drawing something from him through that simple contact. Throughout January and February, Blackwood continued his investigations discreetly. He discovered that the Hallowgrave tradition of spouse exchange at the winter solstice dated back at least 200 years, possibly longer. The villagers accepted it as part of the natural order, like the changing of seasons. More interesting were the patterns he began to notice. Each exchange seemed to follow specific rules. The oldest brother always took the youngest wife, the youngest brother the eldest wife, and so on. And with each passing month, certain physical changes became apparent in the newly formed couples. From his entry dated March 15, 1888, I can no longer attribute the transformations to my imagination. Those who have taken younger spouses seem to be growing younger themselves, their skin more supple, their step lighter. Conversely, those with older partners appear to be aging at an accelerated rate. Sebastian, now paired with the youthful Corin, has lost the stoop in his shoulders that was so pronounced in December. His hair, previously grey at the temples, now shows no trace of silver. By contrast, Corin herself seems to be withering. Her once lustrous hair now dull, dark circles permanently etched beneath her eyes. The most dramatic change is in Victor and Imogen. Victor, previously robust and ruddy-cheeked, now moves like a man 20 years his senior. Imogen, however, glows with vitality. I observed her in the village square yesterday, laughing with an abandon that bordered on mania as she purchased ribbons and lace from the haberdasher. These physical changes defy medical explanation, yet they are consistent with certain esoteric theories regarding the transference of life energy between individuals. Could this be the purpose of the solstice ceremony, a vampiric ritual disguised as a marital exchange? As spring arrived in Thornwick Hollow, Blackwood's journals indicate he had begun to earn the trust of certain members of the household staff at Ravenscroft Hall. A young maid named Jenny provided him with valuable insights into the daily life of the family under their unusual arrangements. From his entry dated April 23, 1888, Jenny confirms what I have suspected. The exchange of spouses is no mere ceremony or social arrangement. The couples truly live as husband and wife in every sense. More disturbingly, she reports that the family maintains detailed records of these exchanges dating back generations, preserved in a locked room in the oldest part of Ravenscroft. According to Jenny, this room, referred to by the servants as the binding chamber, is only accessed by the head of the family, currently Lord Edmund. She described strange sounds emanating from behind its iron-bound door on nights when the moon is new. A sort of whispering, she said, but not like any human voice I've ever heard. When I pressed her about the physical changes in the family members, she crossed herself and whispered, "It's the feeding, sir. Some take, some give, but there's always a balance." Before I could question her further, she was called away. I slipped her a few coins and arranged to meet again next week. There is something here beyond superstition or eccentric family tradition, something that may border on the supernatural. Loath as I am to entertain such notions. Blackwood's next entry described his clandestine meeting with Jenny, but it held a note of frustration. The girl had been vague and frightened, constantly looking over her shoulder as they spoke behind the village church. She provided few new details, only repeating that the balance must be maintained.